Hi, I'm Jenny with Kids Learning for Life, and this is Temperance June. She is my fourth daughter. Today, I just wanted to share my birth story and how everything is going in my family right now. And I know this is a deviation from what we usually do on this channel. We usually just do kind of strictly homeschool videos and we don't get too personal, but in addition to being passionate about homeschooling, I am passionate about home birth. So I wanted to share my experience with you. I will probably be going into detail about birth and everything that goes along with that. So if you are squeamish about that kind of thing, then you might want to tune out. So Temperance's birth was my third home birth. I've had two previously. And even with my oldest daughter, I was planning on having a home birth, but I did have to transfer to the hospital very last minute. So since I've had the experience of both a hospital birth and home births, I can tell you that home birth is where it's at. Home births are just so peaceful and natural, and I also really love to have my husband very involved in the process. So that's what makes home birth the right pick for us. I know from experience that there is a time and a place for giving birth in the hospital, but for most normal births, you don't need to go to the hospital. It's a little bit of overkill. It's totally fine to just give birth at home under the supervision of a midwife. And midwives are just some of my favorite people in the whole world. They are angels on earth and they just are so selfless and they make it all about you and how your family wants to have this birth go. Midwives are medically trained in all the things and they bring so much equipment to a birth that I feel very safe under their care, and they are who I would trust with my well-being and my baby's well-being. The midwifery service that we used for this birth actually includes two midwives. It's a dual practice. So you may hear me refer to multiple midwives in my birth story. That's not typical. Most people just have one midwife, but we happen to have two. So Temperance is now 2 weeks old. I started going into labor on a Friday night, and it was very gradual the way it happened. My husband was actually on his way out of town to go to work, and as he was getting in the car, I went to the bathroom, and here's where it might get a little graphic for people. I lost some of my mucus plug, so I had to call him really quick, and I was like, hey, you might want to come up here because I think I'm going to give birth soon because my mucus plug fell out. That's usually a sign for me. This is how my second birth went, my first home birth, that the baby is probably going to come in about 24 hours. So yeah, things were a little bit hectic because he had to find other people to work instead of him. But at the same time, we were letting the midwife know that it could be happening soon, although losing the mucus plug does not necessarily mean that labor is going to start right away. So I was a little apprehensive to sound the alarm, but I had a feeling that the baby was going to be coming soon within the next day. So that was Friday night, and then on Saturday morning, I called my mother-in-law so she could come over and just be with the older girls, because I thought that was really important to first of all, have her be there for the whole thing. But also, I just wanted my older kids to have someone to go to because I just knew, even if I wasn't fully in active labor yet, I just knew I needed to really be concentrating and I didn't really want to have to help my kids with things. Maybe that would have been better. Maybe it would have been good to be distracted, but I just felt like my husband and I just needed to focus. So it was really good that we had that help. And that Saturday, the contractions were still pretty mild and intermittent, so I still wasn't completely sure if it was going to be happening. So there was just a lot up in the air, even on that morning that she was born. We were mostly just hanging around the house. We weren't really doing much, and I was kind of just staying in bed, which was my go-to mode during this entire pregnancy because I was just so tired all the time. My husband finally, I think he was just like, we got to get things going. So he was like, let's go on a walk. And the thing you need to know is it was really hot that day. It was I think it was 95 degrees or something at the hottest point in the day. And also we live where there are we live on a hill. We live in the mountains. So it's not just like, okay, we're going to go out the front door and go on a walk. It's like, no, we're going to go up a hill and then go down a hill. And then on the way home, have to walk back up that big hill. And so I wasn't very happy about this, but I knew what he was trying to do. So in hindsight, I'm like, thank you for making me take that walk. But in the moment, I was so grumpy about it. So we went outside. It was hot. It was so hot. I just remember it being so hot. And I went up to the top of the hill behind our house and I was like, I'm not going any further. So I stood up there in the shade. I was continuing to time my contractions for the midwives because they still hadn't come yet. None of us were sure what was going on yet. So I was continuing to time my contractions. I stayed in the shade while the rest of my family went down the hill and then came back up. So I watched them. And then we came back home. I do feel like that mark of when we came back home really marked the beginning of actual active labor, because that walk, even though I didn't go far, it kickstarted things for me. So then the contractions were coming very consistently within 5 minutes apart, and they were lasting longer, they were stronger. So at that point, that's when we called the midwives. They were about an hour away, so I wanted to call them with plenty of time for them to come and be ready for the actual birth. So then they started to head up the hill to our house, and I was really glad that we called them when we did, because they were only here for about an hour before I felt like my contractions were getting so intense that I was getting ready to start pushing. So my husband had gotten a lot of stuff ready for the birth already. He had set up the bed. He had pulled out some Chucks pads, which are those absorbent pads. I don't know if you know what those are, but I didn't know what they were until I had my first home birth. And so when the midwives came, they kind of started to set up everything that he hadn't done yet. They had all their equipment. Like I said, midwives come with a little bit of everything for every single situation. So it was a lot of them setting up, and it was perfect timing because it takes them about an hour to set up anyway. So by the time they came, and my contractions were really intense at this point, I think they had fully set up right about the time that my water broke. This whole time I've been laboring, ever since the walk, I had been laboring in bed. So when my water broke, I was like, I don't want to be on this bed anymore because I don't want to make a mess here. And luckily the water broke, I was wearing a pad. So that soaked that up, surprisingly enough. So then I got on the ground and I was like, okay, it's time for me to start getting ready to push, which usually is a very quick phase for me. The last two births, it was just a couple of those pushing contractions. And if you've had a baby before, those pushing contractions are very different than the rest of the contractions that you have. It's a very different feeling. And so I felt like, okay, it's happening now, the baby's just gonna come out now. But it turned out that the pushing phase this time felt completely different than it usually does. And I feel like I was pushing forever and ever, and it was really intense, and I felt like I could feel, since it was going so slow, I could feel just every movement, with every contraction, I just felt exactly where the baby was, which I'm not used to, and it was a little intense, and by a little, I mean a lot. So I didn't want to ask any questions to anyone. My husband, like I said, gets very involved. So he's the one who supports my perineum and catches the baby when the baby comes out. And he wasn't there yet. I didn't feel the baby crowning yet, and he wasn't starting to support the perineum yet, which means that the head, they couldn't see the head yet. And this is after many of these pushing contractions, and it was just a lot. So I didn't want to ask any questions because I feel like if I had heard the answer at that point, then I would have become very disheartened. Oh no, the baby's getting hungry. I would have gotten very disheartened and I would have given up. I mean, not that I actually could, because the baby's coming out whether I like it or not. So I'm going through this, and finally, the head starts to come out, and then she just comes rushing out. The whole head just comes out really fast. And they don't like when that happens. The midwives don't, and I don't either, because that's when you tear, when you're just, everything's going so fast. So then they're like, okay, little pushes, or take breaths now, don't just blast this baby out. And then soon after that, on my next contraction, the rest of her body came out. So the thing about this birth that was different, it turns out, is that this baby, little Temperance, was born posterior. So I don't know if you know what that means. It wasn't something that I had experience with before, but basically that means the baby came out sunny side up. Usually when babies are born, they're facing the mom's back. And this time she was born facing up. And I guess that's not the optimal birth position. I don't know exactly like the terminology or the mechanics of why this is not ideal, but it's just not ideal. And I felt that as I was having her. And so when she came out, we didn't find out the sex of the baby ahead of time. We've never found out, so it was gonna be a surprise. And when she came out, I saw her like her whole front of her body, and it was just very unusual because usually like the baby comes out, but it's facing away from me, and then the baby's placed on my chest. This time I saw her whole body like right away, so that was kind of interesting. But then I knew she was a girl basically immediately, which was really fun. And I had been hoping for a girl. This is a side note. I had been hoping for a girl because I already have all the girls' stuff, and I like the book Little Women, and that's a family of 4 girls, so that's just kind of always the joke I've made, like, oh, I get to be Marmee if I have 4 girls. I would have been extremely thrilled to have a boy. There are multiple people in the family that were guessing it was a boy. Actually, everyone I have encountered in the wild was guessing that it was a boy. So it was very surprising that it was Temperance who was born and not a boy. So that moment when you have the baby and you have the baby on your chest and you've met the baby for the first time, and it's like that sense of relief, it's just literally the best feeling in the world. And this whole pregnancy, I just, hadn't really been feeling great. I feel like I don't, it's never been diagnosed, and I don't really know, like, if it's me just like blowing things up in my head, but I feel like for this pregnancy and my last pregnancy, had some form of like prenatal depression. I don't know what to call it, because I was just very lethargic. I just kind of lost interest in doing the things that I usually like to do. And it's not unbearable, but it's really not fun. So I just don't feel like myself at all. I don't look like myself. I'm not interested in doing the things that I usually like to do. I'm not like outgoing and happy to be around people like I usually am. So that moment that the baby's born, it's like all of a sudden I feel like myself again. That happened my last birth, my 3rd birth, and this one. So that's just something that I guess I have to deal with in pregnancy these days, although I'm not planning on having another one. The whole pregnancy, I'd been holding on to this feeling that I would have once the baby was born, when the baby comes out and is on my chest, and it's like such a relief. So I love that moment. It's my 4 daughters' births were just the best moments of my life. Those 4 hours, because you have that golden hour when the baby stays on your chest. Those hours are just like the best hours of my life ever. So then I got back on the bed right here, actually right where I am, and I had skin to skin time with Temperance. This is the time in which the midwives kind of assess our vitals, but they never take the baby away. So they're able to do everything with the baby on your chest, which is the gentlest, best way to spend that golden hour. They make sure the placenta comes out and that it's intact, which it was. And you just kind of, I don't know, that time just always flies by. It surprises me when an entire hour has gone by during that time. But then eventually they make me get up. I have to go like to the bathroom. They do like the whole newborn check. They weigh the baby, which is really fun. They just kind of just make sure, 10 fingers, 10 toes type of stuff. I just love that time because it's like there's no pressure anymore, that we could just like hang out with the midwives and we have this new fun baby. So Temperance ended up weighing 7 pounds, 15 ounces, which that's my biggest baby. I think my oldest was like 7 pounds, 11 ounces. And that was my previous biggest baby, and then the other 2 had been smaller and smaller. Well, my 4th one was my biggest baby at 7 pounds, 15 ounces and 21 inches long. So she was a bigger baby than I've had before. But the interesting thing is she's actually my earliest baby based on due dates. She came 12 days early. And so who knows? I mean, I'm making this video just a few days after her due date. And I mean, she could have been this big when she was born. Who knows? So that was interesting to me to find out that this was going to be my biggest baby. This postpartum period has been pretty good. The first few days were rough. Because she was born posterior, it caused just a lot more discomfort down there for me. in the days after. I feel great now, but at the time I was like, am I ever going to feel normal again? So it was kind of intense. And also what they don't really talk about or tell you too much, the midwives do, but like other people don't really talk about it too much, is the more kids you have, the more postpartum cramps you have. So like with your first baby, your uterus contracts back down pretty easily. I don't remember having any cramps. And the cramps are brought on by breastfeeding. With the subsequent kids, it got worse and worse. So this time my cramps were very bad. Every time she latched on, it wasn't the latching on that was uncomfortable. It was the cramping. It feels like you're going through labor again, but in a way it's almost more intense because it's not like normal contractions that end after a minute. It was like the whole time I would feed her, which, as you know, if you've breastfed before, sometimes babies can be latched on there for a long time. It was for the whole entire time that I felt just intense cramping. So that wasn't very fun, but really since then I've been feeling really good. I really did stick to the whole like do nothing for 2 weeks thing. I did that more for like a week and a half. I was just in bed or at home, not really doing anything. I had a lot of help from my husband, from my older kids, from my mother-in-law who came and visited several times. So I was able to really take it easy. So like my bleeding has stopped because I usually bleed for like almost a month after I give birth. And this time, I mean, I'm 2 weeks out and it's over. So it's been really good. I feel like my body feels like myself again. I'm not able to fit in my pre-pregnancy jeans yet, but that's okay. It'll come in time. Just wearing my, my leggings or my, I don't know, workout clothes still. Regarding homeschooling and just our usual family life in general, it's all been going really well. I actually started doing school with my kids like just maybe a couple days after the birth because I was just in bed. And I'm like, what else am I gonna do? Like I kind of wanted to keep as much structure as possible for them. So I had them just come into the bed and we did bed schooling, which is something I've talked about on our Instagram a lot lately because I did that a lot when I was pregnant too. And basically I just have them bring all their stuff in here. I don't necessarily have them do everything, like math and language arts, which is usually our daily thing. I just at least have them do something. And so they come into bed, they have their pencil, they have their books, and we do it from here. And it's really nice. So that's what I've been doing if I'm feeding the baby in here, or I just want to be like kind of laid back. I'll just have them bring all their stuff in here and it's really not a big deal. Since we're past that 2 week mark and I can kind of do more, I do plan on putting the baby in the carrier more and kind of doing stuff out in the living room and being more of a real person soon. But for now, the bed schooling thing has worked really well for us. I do plan on doing a video more about this in the future, but we've been using the good and the beautiful lately. I just knew in this time in my life I needed something more open and go, very, very complete, something that would just be everything I needed a curriculum to be. So not so piecemeal, I guess. So I do plan on talking more about my experience with the good and the beautiful, how I found it, how it's been working out, and even doing like in-depth reviews and flip throughs of the levels that my girls are in. So stay tuned for that. The baby's getting hungry, so I'm gonna wrap this up soon. But fall activities have all either started already or are starting this upcoming week. So that will be another big adjustment. They've already started, we did karate and piano year round. They've already started a few weeks of soccer practice, which has been great for them to go and get their energy out. Even my youngest, who doesn't play soccer yet, she goes and plays on the playground during, and it's like just really great exercise for all of them. So, and then this upcoming week is when choir and drama start too. So it will be our first like full week coming up, and so I'm really excited about that. I'm glad the baby came when she did because now I'm healed and recovered before all this stuff happened, because technically I could still be pregnant right now, which is just wild to think about. You could still be in there. So I'm really excited to like see everyone again and like, share the baby with the world and just be out and be a real human again. I'm feeling very at peace with this being our last baby. I feel like our family is complete finally. With all of my previous births, it was always like, okay, and then when the next one comes, we were always planning for having 4. So now that we have 4, it's kind of like, now I can get rid of things. I got rid of all my maternity clothes. I got rid of a bunch of baby boy clothes that we had acquired over the years, just in case we ever had a baby boy. I know, you're getting hungry. So it's just really interesting to be now in this stage of life where I can get rid of things for the first time. If you're curious to hear more about our extracurriculars and how we fit them all into our homeschool schedule and routine, I will link to my video about my extracurricular schedule right over here. The baby's hungry, so I'll see you next time, and happy homeschooling.